Hello, I'm Lucy Weinstein, and I'm glad to be here this afternoon, even if it is on Zoom, to present my study on disparate impacts of noise exposure in the United States. So let me get the PowerPoint up and start the slideshow. My colleagues on this study were Janine Botta and Jamie Banks, all of whom are members of the Noise and Health Committee on the section on environmental health of APHA, and also we're all part of quiet communities. The purpose of the study is to examine disparate impacts of noise exposure. We did a literature search, including PubMed and other databases, and there have also been some community surveys from one of our authors, Community Contacts in New York City. Most people don't realize how harmful noise actually is. Human exposure to noise is widespread, and it's increasingly recognized as a public health hazard. Although it's been recognized for many decades, it hasn't received as much attention as it should have. Adverse effects of noise are not just auditory. Of course, there's hearing loss, tinnitus, actually increased risk of dementia with isolation from hearing loss in the elderly, and then many non-auditory effects of noise, including sleep disruption, a cortisol release, which leads to stress response, of course, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, and many others, including premature mortality overall. It interferes with cognition and learning in children. It reduces achievement and productivity. How do we measure noise? There is a decibel scale. It's measured logarithmically so that a 10 decibel difference signifies twice as loud, not just a 10-fold increase. A 3 decibel difference is noticeable to the ear. What are some common noise sources? Aircraft noise, motorcycles with modified exhaust systems. You may not know that when motorcycles come out of the factory, they're actually not that noisy, but they can be modified illegally to produce quite a bit of noise. Gas leaf blowers and other landscape equipment, trains, dirt bikes, busy highways, car alarms, and horn honking, illegal horn honking. Car alarms are a real problem in some of our urban areas and other areas as well. Fireworks, factories. Here's a study that was done quite a while ago, 1982. Dr. Arlene Bronzaft in New York City did a study in a New York City public school in a minority area that was right adjacent to a railroad track, a New York City subway was actually the elevated train, and noted that in classrooms that were close to the railroad, student scores were not as good as those of students in classrooms that were not close to the trains. And when the New York City subway transit system actually put some cushioning, rubber pads on the tracks, student scores actually improved. So it's a before and after study. There was another one in 2014 around Los Angeles Airport, LAX, where there was no sound insulation around an elementary school. They measured teacher effects as well as effects on students, and the teacher and student behaviors fluctuated with the noise, even at low to moderate levels. Who is most impacted by noise? Urban areas, lower income, lower educational level, areas of greater general segregation, and an increased proportion of non-white residents. It should be noted that there are some caveats. Some noise types, for example, landscape equipment, may be more common in suburban areas. Objective measurements of noise, decibel levels, don't necessarily capture the degree of harmful effects. And also loudness is not the only metric that affects subjective response and health. It can be frequency, tonality, repetitiveness, the type of noise. There was a study from the Harvard School of Public Health and Boston University School of Public Health that older people exposed to aircraft noise may actually face increased risk of hospitalization for cardiovascular disease. Disparate impact studies specifically have been done nationally and locally. A national study by Collins et al. In 2019 studied all public schools. Can you imagine 94,432 schools in the contiguous United States? They figured out locations, demographics, And they did find that schools with a greater proportion of Hispanic, Black, or Asian and Pacific Islander students had much more road noise and greater odds of aviation noise exposure. So there were disparate impacts. Another national study showed that there were noise levels that were higher in locations with a higher proportion of non-white residents and lower socioeconomic status. They did a national noise map and they compared it against US Census Bureau data. Dr. Casey says this very well could explain some of the health disparities that we see between Black and white residents nationwide. Some regional studies, there was a study in the Twin Cities, that's Minneapolis, St. Paul region of Minnesota. They studied vehicular and aircraft patterns and matched that with demographic and socioeconomic data from the 2000 census. And sure enough, there was an association between noise levels and household income, household value, and percent of non-white residents. There was a study done, actually community survey in Washington Heights, New York, and New York City, Upper Manhattan. There was a questionnaire, bilingual, posted on Facebook. They got 229 responses, and they had some interesting quotes. Some typical ones, for example, the year 2020 was particularly insane for fireworks. I was particularly upset as my seeing eye dog was traumatized by fireworks noise, etc. Similar ones, people said they had to accommodate their sleep schedule to had to change rather their sleep schedule to accommodate people playing loud music. Really, really sad, but music has noise has quite an effect on people. There's some more community responses that I will leave on the PowerPoint and I won't read to you, but it's pretty sad what people have to put up with. So what are some of the causes of these disparities that we've found? Well, unfortunately, polluting industries historically have been placed in low-income communities. And post-World War II, there were some decisions that cited federal highway and aviation infrastructure near minority neighborhoods. And then there's zoning and land use decisions on roads, industrial sites, and other sources of noise and pollution that favor the wealthy. And they take advantage of differences in political power defined by race and socioeconomic class. So in conclusion, in the United States, low-income and minority communities are exposed to much more environmental noise pollution than other populations. And this likely contributes to their disproportionately poor health outcomes. So noise is one of the factors that may contribute to poor health outcomes among these populations. What can we do about it? Well, I should mention that our APHA committee, our Noise and Health Committee, has updated the noise policy, and it's in process, and we're incorporating some of the suggestions that I have here. We need more advocacy, we need education for local and government officials, local and regional government officials, departments of health, and we need elected leaders to provide some community education about local noise ordinances so people are aware of what's legal and what isn't. Reframe noise complaints, the wording, as reporting violations of regulations. That makes it sound a little different. Building code revisions have to be done, and then after the fact to mitigate noise sources when possible. These are what we call engineering solutions, highway barriers, quiet or roadway materials, making cars default not have that beeping when you lock it, if many of you are aware of that. In other countries, that's not the default. They're quieter. Sound installations and other mitigating things we can do, and increased enforcement of violations. What do we need to do? Well, we always say we need more work. Well, we do. We need some more research studies that help figure out what these disparities are due to and how we can change that to make our United States and the world, of course, a quieter and healthier place. And we need to bring in some more community voices. I have here some resources that I'll leave on the PowerPoint for general information about noise that you can look up. And then I have the references for some of the studies that have been done regarding disparities in noise exposure. So I thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure being here. Wish I could be here in person with everybody. and I'll be there to answer questions at some of the breakout sessions. Please contact me. I'll have my contact information available if you have additional questions or would like to join some of our advocacy work. Thank you again.